Hello and welcome to Dee Code. Today we're talking about historic and no-encoded messages associated with Enochian Magic and John Dee. If you don't know what the Dee Code is, if you don't know who John Dee is or Enochian Magic, please do check out the introduction to this video series. You can find that on YouTube or at dcode.org to give you some context. Let's start off with some definitions today. We're going to talk about codes, ciphers, and steganography. Because it's really important to know what we're talking about and to use effective language to describe what we're seeing within the Dee text. So we'll start with the word codes. So it focuses on the concealment of a message within a word, a phrase, an image, generally inclusive of allusion, literary phrases, etc. So the code is embedded within a message or something like that. You decode it by understanding, actually every time that they use this symbol, it means that. Every time they use this phrase, it means that. And so this is a sort of way to hide secret knowledge within public experiences. If you need an example of that, please just check out some of the like the sacred geometry behind the nation's capital, or literary allusions. This is not new information regarding how people conceal messages within other messages. The next definition is cipher. Cipher, and this is concealment focused on individual letter. This is more technical than codes because it takes a message and it puts it into it translates the letters based on a system. So you might be familiar with the term ciphertext or encrypted, that sort of thing. So it takes the letters of a plain text, encrypts it into ciphertext, which is then in turn decrypted back into plain text using a cipher key. So in this case, I'll show you examples of this coming up. The third definition I would like to put forward is steganography, which is the concealment of a message within another message. Generally here it might be either an encoded ciphered message or a plain text message within another message. And so this is very important to know because these three means of concealment are actually active at all levels from multiple different parties within the Enochian communications. All right, so the Dee Code hypothesis, and this is pretty simple, is that there are coded messages within the Sloan manuscript 3191 that have not yet been publicly decoded and are relevant both directly to Enochian magical practice and indirectly to historical understandings of the British Empire. The hypothesis is based on the documented fascination of codes from Dr. John Dee, and there is a significant historical precedent for codes, and we'll cover what that precedent is. And I would say there's actually more precedent that the Enochian communications, as well as De Heptarchia Mystica from Sloan 3191, there's more precedent that is actually an encoded and encrypted message than it is angel communication. Not to say, and I'm talking about historic precedent, I'm not talking about Enochian practice per se. There is precedent that is some level of communication. The hypothesis is also based on the decoding of Shakespeare's sonnets by Alan Green. So his work really does show that there is a conspiracy to encode mathematical and sacred understandings within Shakespeare's texts that likely involved multiple people, not just Shakespeare, and probably definitely involved Dr. John Dee, primarily because of the inclusion of the Enochian tables in that code itself, as well as there is historic evidence that is physically based, meaning hidden treasure, based on these encoded treasure maps within Shakespeare's sonnet. And he's gone through and sort of proved out that that is actually the case. So that really opened my mind to saying this is not just speculation. This is how it was working back then. And unless we take into account that historic context and the historic precedents in our Enochian work, and it's more history than just looking to the Golden Dawn. It's more history than looking to Aleister Crowley. Is actually going back to that time period and seeing how they engaged with this material. And that's primarily through things like the Western liberal arts, which has been more or less systematically eradicated from our education systems. So that seems to be an issue, and so we need to go through, re-educate ourselves in how this tradition communicated within itself. And there are like literary allusions within the code of within the manuscript of Sloan 3191 itself, and I'll point to those shortly. The code involves multiple dimensions of meaning and encipherment, all of which have historic precedent. But I'm talking about artistic, alchemic, emblematic, ciphertext, geometry, mathematics, gematria. All of these things come together to encode multiple dimensions of meaning. So let's start with some historic precedents. We have an example called the Alberti Cipher. This is one of the more the earliest examples of a cipher disk within this historic time frame. It was created in 1467. It's polyalphabetic, meaning it deals with multiple alphabet systems, and you would use this system according to a procedure. It's not just the disk, it's a procedure you needed to know to translate the letters, moving the disk backwards and forwards. So this may actually be a precedent for use of the sigillum de Ameth, actually. Next, we have the Vigenere Cipher, which is created in 1553. This is during the lifetime of John Dee, 10 years before he wrote the Monus Hieroglyphica, 30 years before he compiled De Heptarchia Mystica, and it's 10 years before he copied over Trithemius' Stenographia. So this is sort of what a cipher table looks like, and you use this table to, as you proceed through encrypting or decrypting, you go down lines, and you use this to create an more or less undecipherable thing, because when you use a single like this is equal to that, that's called the Caesar cipher, where we go, okay, let's take this text and then translate it up five letters, and then that's there. You can use things like letter frequency to say, hey, this shows up in the same level of frequency as this other letter. So the Vigenere Cipher gets around that by shifting what letters you're translating the other letters into. Next up is the Planetary Squares and Gematria. So this is all expressed in the 3 books of occult philosophy by Cornelius Agrippa, which was said to sit on Dee's desk. And this has been one of the things that clued me into higher order dimensions of meaning within the Enochian tables. So here we have an example of the planetary square for Saturn, and as you can see, all of the lines here add up to 15. Each of the columns, each of the rows, all of the diagonals, 15. The number itself of the columns is associated with a planetary number, and in Cornelius Agrippa's work, these were demonstrated in Hebrew letters, which is a very important connection because each Hebrew letter corresponds to a number. They have numeric values, and when you you reduce the the names of angels, oftentimes in Hebrew, into the numeric forms and add them all up together, you get specific numbers. That's like the gematria value. Gematria is key to John Dee's understanding, as demonstrated by the Monas Hieroglyphica. So he spent, since the time of working with Monas Hieroglyphica, a clear demonstration of his knowledge of this gematria. He had 30 years right, before he started engaging with the Enochian tables. And so this is really important because we have the tables that are mathematically derivable, right? And these have mathematical formula and algorithms that are easily comprehended in the mind once the whole system is understood. So you don't necessarily have to figure out where all the numbers go in this table, and there are tables that have dozens of columns. You need to know the process, the algorithm of deriving these tables, which is often through geometric forms, like you have lines and stuff like that, and then you move things out. These also involve projections of the table to beyond just the 3 grid. That might be actually, you can imagine a diagonal figure, a triangular figure like you might see in the Holy Lammen, as supporting the generation of just one square, which is a much smaller square. So these are well known and documented ways of working with magic squares, and that in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, mathematicians use as a sort of recreation. I encountered the book The New Recreations with Magic Squares. That's what cued me in on this, was that there is a different way to look at this other than just magical in some way. So we've got the seals of Saturn, the intelligence of Saturn, and the spirit of Saturn in the on the slide here. These correspond with Hebrew names. So the seal of Saturn, the intelligence of Saturn, the spirit of Saturn. They all have specific names that have you kind of spell out the values. So in the case of the spirit of Saturn, right, you can see that up at the top left of that spirit of Saturn, it corresponds with a 4. In the bottom right, there is 6. And then in between, they hit the number 7 and 8, it looks like. So it's a squiggle. Those spell out, actually, sequences of numbers that are spelled out and maybe translated into verbal letters that then form the name of the spirit of Saturn, which is a sort of angelic name. So those are derived in equivalent. And so it's really important to know that a sigil is magical in its own right, but is actually perhaps reducible back to numeric values, all of which add up to a certain number, into language, actual language we use to name these things. So there's a correspondence between number, letter, and glyph that all have magical numeric properties of adding up to specific numbers that are meaningful. So this is well understood. This sort of stuff is well understood, well documented, and there is a strong historic precedent. Dee had this on his desk, this book. So it's not like it's... This is the language he was speaking in. This was the language he was reading in by the time he worked with the Enochian tables. This is one of my favorite encrypted texts. So here, as opposed to the planetary squares, we might say the information, the sigils are encoding specific names and meaning into the sigil, but they're not cipher. This is actually a cipher because it focuses on individual letters, has an algorithmic process to understand it. This is really interesting because this is a book of Soyga. There's like dozens of pages that look like this, each of them having a single word or something at the top that sort of relate it to a planetary influence or something like that. John Dee had this book. He didn't know how to interpret it. He asked the angel Uriel, "Hey, is it of any excellence?" The angel says, "Yes, it is." And then John Dee says, "Hey, I heard it's a cursed book. I might only live for 2.5 years after reading it. What will happen? And Uriel says, you'll live for more than 100 years. So this is central to Dee. I don't know if he understood it at that time, but in 2006, Jim Reed's published a paper called John Dee and the Magic Tables in the Book of Soyga, which demonstrates the decipherment of these tables. And it is so well understood that he was able to correct clerical errors presented within the codes, within the book. So he goes, okay, this system, his understanding's so good of the code and cipher, he can correct errors and complete uncompleted sentences. So that's where we need to get with the D code. This is the standard in terms of being able to prove the hypothesis there is a code, is to decode and complete missing bits of information. And I have predictions around that with that D code presented in De Heptarchia Mystica. But just please be aware that this level of encipherment actually is at the heart, is the context of the Enochian workings. So now we've come to Trithemius. Trithemius is Stenographia, which is the sure art of disclosing the intention of one's mind to those who are absent through secret writing. And this is by Trithemius, an abbot, and I believe he wrote that in the 1400s, mid to late 1400s. And then Dee got the book somewhere in the mid 1500s. He spent 10 days translating it. And so this is all about concealing hidden messages within other messages and using polyalphabetic ciphers, which I'll show you shortly. But here's an example. This is from the trithemius.com. If you're curious about it, check that website out. It's wonderful. This is the other clue for me that there is a D code within the Heptarchia Mystica, the chapter 5 prayer. So this begins saying, the key and operation of which is held by the spirit prince Pamaseal, and then gibberish through the assistance of gibberish and gibberish. An overture to them is made, first of all, with an exorcism. So there's the angel names that are gibberish, right? There's the weird letters, which might actually remind you of the 49 good angels, or the Enochian angels and the Enochian metaphysics, right? It's gibberish words. It's hard to make sense of. But here they actually are gibberish. They're the names of angels. And when you take the specific letters out of them, it composes a clue, which says, take the first letter of every word. And then in the text it says, an overture to them is made, first of all, with an exorcism, and then later on the page it goes like, understand it, whether in Latin, his native tongue, or other language. And when he has said that, sat down to write, facing the east, let him summon the spirits thusly. So it's talking about, there's this whole temple furniture as well with this, facing the east. There's all sorts of stuff. It's very complex. But it's important to know that let him summon the spirits thusly. And so he has here the name of angels, several bits of different language that feels a lot like angelic language might be, with the different names and things like that. And so you take this text, and there's bits and pieces that you pull out of it. You can actually see patterns here. And it comes to form another sentence. Take care that the first letter of each word returns to the reader your secret meaning. So he's instructing the reader about how to work with codes and things like that, embedded within information like angelic communication, which is then corresponded with a complex system of temple furniture and cipher keys. So this gave me a clue, right? It's like, oh, he has prayers, he has orations. These are all words that feel like they would fit in with the medieval, dogmas of the church, but there's something else going on here. This is reading through this made me go, oh, the prayers that John Dee is having us do are like this. They're encoded like this. I'm not sure how, but it's the only thing that makes sense, and there's a clear precedent here. This is an example of Trithemius's the Trithemian conjuration and kind of temple furniture. You can see there's a crystal ball. You can see there's material there. You can see that there's different angel names around and geometries and things like that. There's a lot. There's a lot in here, but I wanted to give a sense of like some of the tools that might be associated with Trithemius around this, because this establishes a precedent for the Enochian table furniture. Next, I want to just call to mind around the Monus Hieroglyphica. This is a text written by John Dee in 1560s, several decades before the Enochian communications. But this is showing the level of complexity already present and encoded within his work. So my hypothesis here is, right, let's actually not look to the Enochian tables, right? Let's not try to crack the code of Edward Kelly, who is perhaps a fraud or a hoax. And I don't actually believe that in the same way that people say. I say, let's not actually look to cracking the code of angelic language. Let's actually look to the biography and the bibliographies of John Dee and interpret what is clearly his language, his coded language, in ways that are clearly understood in terms of his system of encoding. And so the Monus Hieroglyphica can serve as a key to understanding how his coding works, because it's been decoded, at least in terms of understanding of geometry, number, and alchemical significance. There's more in there, but it can give you a practice as to understanding how his mind was working. I share this book, The Meaning of the Monus Hieroglyphica, with regards to geometry. This is simply just a screen capture of a page, but it works through many different ways of understanding. And so I'd recommend you to check that out. It's by Jim Egan. All right, so I keep mentioning the Bard Code as well by Alan Green. Check it out, To Be or Not to Be. This is another example of encoded language, encoded information within the Shakespeare sonnets. The book itself had coded geometry that clued Alan into all this multi-dimensional encoding illusions that really produced physically verifiable predictions. And that's the other thing we need to get to, right? So Jim Reed's produced an understanding that produced capacity to complete and correct encrypted text. Alan produced predictions that were verified through physicality. He went on a treasure hunt basically and found where treasure is. He just can't open it up because it's at the center of an altar stone in a church in England. So do check that out. So we've covered a lot of encoded messages, and I will invite you to some action, which is to immerse yourself in the known codes and historic precedents associated with John Dee. So this is the Monus Hieroglyphica, the Bard Code, Trithemius, and cryptography. Then also deepen your exploration of the liberal arts. You will not come to an understanding of the codes if you look at it from the point of view exclusively of modern day cryptography, modern day understanding of mathematics. Actually, you need a geometric understanding of mathematics. You need to understand the basics of liberal arts, religion, philosophy, astronomy, music, right? So these guys were fluent in music, geometry, arithmetic, history, philosophy, and they can translate the same idea across these different modes of communication and encode it This is just talking about regular encoded messages, not just cryptography. So the cryptography, actually, those patterns, those productions, the procedures associated with the cryptography may actually be encoded like literature, right? Like in the literary encoding, like the monist, like we encode, like there wasn't ciphertext in the monist, there was coded allusions that helped bring about this understanding. And it's present there. They present everything there in the codes. You don't need extra keys to understand it except your own mind and education. So work with that, please. You can also join the e-course decode.org for guided meditations, deep dives into topics, and practice videos in Q&A with me. So I want to do my promotions now. If you're part of the lecture series or e-course, you can skip on to the next video. But I want to call out decode.org, which you can get information regarding this whole inquiry at that website. You can join the e-course. You can go to cosmicdreamsanctuary.org to schedule time with me for dream work and hypnosis based on Western esoteric and mindfulness traditions. So this is more veering towards the angelic communication side than anything else. D-SETI offers dream work sessions and training regarding extraordinary and anomalous experiences like ET contact and dream. This is from a research-based and actually scientific perspective. I am a PhD student in integral noetic sciences. I base my work on peer-reviewed literature regarding hypnosis, and that is why I'm offering the hypothesis that hypnosis, and especially regression hypnosis, is not a source of veridical information. It's actually shamanic dream work. And then finally, check out Dreamwell at dreamwellbewell.com. It is the mobile app to help you sleep, dream, and be well. It offers mindfulness training, a dream journal, and guided meditations. And that's really a great way to connect. So thank you for considering all these coded messages and things like that. I really hope that you have the experience of opening your eyes to a whole new dimension of meaning, particularly in the legacy of our own Western liberal arts tradition. I want you to look to the old buildings or the old art or the old literature and realize that these people were not stupid. Like a lot of modern people believe that old people were stupid. They weren't stupid. They're actually smarter and more educated than most of the people here and now in the modern day world. And we don't understand that because there has been a systematic effort to take the liberal arts out of our education system in order to produce cogs in a system, to produce people who can sit on an assembly line but not question their bosses. So I say one of the most radical things you can do in this world, especially now in this very bizarre political experience, is to turn back to the tradition of Western liberal arts. So thank you for doing that. Knowing that you yourself are capable of understanding all of these things, that you have it within yourself, the capacity to understand this beautiful legacy and to contribute to that in meaningful ways. So once again, thanks for being with me, and I'll see you in the future videos.